My resolve is that the play should be credited to Edward de Vere and not William Shakespeare. We believe that Edward de Vere wrote William Shakespeare based on many reasons. Many Oxfordians believe that the true author of Shakespeare's plays was an aristocrat named Edward de Vere. The evidence for his comprehensive ranging from Edward de Vere's aristocratic knowledge and of upper classes through his education and the structural similarities between his poetry and Shakespeare's. This is according to a website called Absolute Shakespeare. My first contention is Edward de Vere in his early age wrote sonnets much similar to William Shakespeare's. William Shakespeare would have only been 15 years old. And he was the merchant of Venice, and he was pinned. Edward's life was similar to Hamlet, and many believe the play was about his own life. Edward de Vere was born in 1550, 14 years before Shakespeare's birth in Stratford upon Avon, and he had inherited the title of 17th Earl of Oxford before his teenage years. We got all that information from news.bbc.co.uk. That leads into my next contention, which is Edward de Vere's knowledge of his upper class life and his education. William Shakespeare was not of the higher class. Edward de Vere graduated from Cambridge University at 14 years old. He was a Master of Art by the age of 16 and studied laws. He studied law at Gray's Inn. Laws requires a certain prerequisite level of education, just like the plays like The Merchant of Venice discussed law. All that was according to AbsoluteShakespeare.com. Edward de Vere was also nurtured by in art, poetry, and stagecraft. Edward and his father were the patrons of one of England's earliest acting companies and performed under aristocrats' patronage. He was tutored by England's finest scholars also, and we got that from authorshipstudies.org. My next contention is Edward de Vere's name resembles Shakespeare. Edward de Vere was nicknamed Spear Shaker due to his ability both at tournaments and because of his coat of arms featured the lines brandishing a spear. De Vere, like I said earlier, de Vere was born in the 1550, 14 years before Shakespeare's birth, and he inherited the title of 17th Earl of Oxford before his teenage years, according to authorshipstudies.org. According to his background, he created lavish entertainment for the Queen and her court. He was an acclaimed writer, poet, and playwright of his own lifetime. Indeed, he was recognized as the foremost writer of his age by Henry Peacham, declared the most excellent of Elizabethan court poets, and William Webb, and acknowledged by George Puntham as the best of those Elizabethan writers who was Puntham revealed in the art of English poesy. They were published without appending their own names to their works. He received a host of literary dedications that distinguished him as a permanent among writers in the Elizabethan age. William Shakespeare of Stratford upon Avon, no one in his own lifetime ever dedicated a thing more. Moreover, when Stratford Will died, he was buried in a grave that did not even bear his name. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Leah Romero, and I did my debate with Coleton. My intro is that many people believe that Shakespeare's credit should be given to Edward de Vere. There are many books written that argue Shakespeare writing his poems. There are intelligent people that claim that evidence that Edward de Vere wrote all of what we know as Shakespeare's work. Shakespeare scholars have the job of studying, writing, and teaching about Shakespeare and find the claims about Edward de Vere false. They claim they are not even worth discussing or stressing over. It is for this reason that my partner and I must uphold the con idea in this debate on the resolution that during Shakespeare's time, writers had to hide their identity. Our resolve is the plays of William Shakespeare should not be attributed to Edward de Vere, but stay true to William Shakespeare. I wish to not define any terms at this time. Many people have nicknames that they go by because their names are too long or cannot be pronounced right. You can Google any play about William Shakespeare and there's clearly evidence that he wrote the play, and he performed in it also. Many people have performed plays that clearly state the author is William Shakespeare. But there are still people that disagree and give Edward de Vere the credit. Let me explain to you a few reasons I can prove people wrong. The three main arguments we believe force the rejection of the resolution are: during the last half of the 16th century, writers had to hide their identity. The second one is William Shakespeare was an actor in the company which performed the plays of William Shakespeare also. The third one is you'll find the name William Shakespeare on almost every play and poem from his time. The first argument or contention is during the last half of the 16th century, writers had to hide their identity. They weren't allowed to speak their mind, and then when writing poems, you speak your mind. You write whatever comes to your mind and what you feel. If you wrote a poem, that means that you're expressing your feelings and you could get in trouble with the laws. If you were caught, you were imprisoned, assassinated, or mutilated. Writers had to then protect their identity. They had to make fake names, that way law enforcers didn't catch them writing their poems. This may be the reason Shakespeare's name wasn't found on a lot of his work. Many writers published anonymously, shielding themselves and their families from bad reputations and persecution according to politic warmth. The fact is that the handful of scholars scattered far and wide at universities around the world who interest themselves in the lives and works of not only Shakespeare but also the authors of this time have always known that an authorship question dogs most of the important works of the early modern period, and that all the works of this period, only a handful can be attributed with complete security to a particular author. The second argument is that William Shakespeare was an actor in the company which performed the plays of William Shakespeare. From 1594, the plays of William Shakespeare were performed exclusively done by the acting company known as the Lord Chamberlain's Men, Lord Hudson's Men, and the King's Men. William Shakespeare was, of course, a prominent member of the acting company, as the following evidence demonstrates. On March 15, 1595, the treasurer of the Queen's Chamber paid William King, William Shakespeare, and Richard Burbage, surgeons to the Lord Chamberlain for performances at court in Greenwich on December 26th and 27th of the previous year. Also on March 13, 1602, John Manningham of the Middle Temple recorded in his diary a racy anecdote that Richard Burbage of course William Shakespeare. Another fact we have is that on May 19, 1603, the Lord Chamberlain's men were licensed as the King's Men. This document lists Lawrence Fletcher, William Shakespeare, Richard Burbage, Augustine Phillips, Ion Higgins, Henry Conwell, William Sly, Robert Amar, and Richard Cowley as members of the troupe. The Shakespeare prominence is indicated by the fact that he appears second on the list behind only Lawrence Fletcher, who is, in case you didn't know, he acted for King James in Scotland, and who was the King's favorite actor. My third and last argument is explaining the rejection of his name William Shakespeare appearing on everything. One example we found from Shakespeare Authorship.com was in 1593, the year a narrative poem, Venus and Adonis, was published by Stratford native Richard Field, within the dedication to the Earl of Southampton signed William Shakespeare. The dedications refer to the author's unpolished lines and contains typically fawning lines of the commoner addressing a nobleman for patronage. The following year, the Rape of Loris was published, also with a dedication to the Southampton signed yet by William Shakespeare. Both poems went through many editions over the next half of the century, all with the same dedication signed with William Shakespeare. The next evidence we found by the same website was in 1601. The volume Love My Tree by Robert Chester contains short poems by several well-known theatrical poets. One of those poems, untitled in the volume but known as The Phoenix and the Turtle, is signed William Shakespeare. This volume was printed by Richard Field, who had also printed Shakespeare's two narrative poems. In conclusion, those on the con side of the resolution believe that Shakespeare wrote all of the work and give no credit to Edward de Vere. Oxfordians claim that the name William Shakespeare was a pseudonym used by Oxford, and that there is nothing to tie the name to William Shakespeare of Stratford. But William Shakespeare actually has no characteristics of the pseudonym. It was just a real name of a person that was closely connected with the production of the plays. Also, there is no indication in this historical record that anybody has ever suspected it of being a pseudonym, or said that anybody other than Shakespeare is author. All the historical evidence ties William Shakespeare of Stratford to the plays bearing his name, as well as demonstrated and talked about in our case. So please do us a favor and vote con on this side. Vote that William Shakespeare holds his name on all of his plays and everything, and he holds and stays true. Thank you.
Talked about these diaries from people and how it shows proof that he wrote them, but yet stated no proof of where they came from and what they said. There's no. If you look at a picture of William Shakespeare, you think of that one picture, right? But yet, there was never a picture recorded of him, a picture taken, or a picture drawn of him. So that's kind of hard to think. Like, how can you give a person so much credit and all this, but yet don't even know what he looks like? Shakespeare was born into a family with unremarkable status, and long stretches in his life remained undocumented. That was according to the newsbc.co. So another key thing that kind of is crazy to think about is the Shakespearean sonnet, you know, the 14 lines, the A, B, all that. Actually, he didn't invent that. Edward de Vere's uncle, Henry Howard V, invented that, and that's according to authorshipstudies.org. So Edward de Vere, his whole life, grew up with knowledge of poetry and all that. He was used to these sonnets and all that, so that's how he wrote so many similar ones. So de Vere, he traveled a lot in Italy. He spent, and 14 plays that Shakespeare wrote had an Italy setting, but yet there's no proof that not that William Shakespeare was ever in Italy or had the law study and things like that. That is all.
Okay, so I have several questions for you. You said diaries. I didn't mention anything about diaries.
Diaries/journals.
Diaries and journals as documents, probably. Okay, and then what do you mean at law? How are you 14 and at law? What do you mean?
Like,
Because you said, how can Shakespeare be 14 but at law?
no, Shakespeare wrote his play, The Merchant of Venus, at 15 years old. That play had a lot of law in it. And Edward de Vere studied law at 16.
Okay, but don't you think, like, we know a lot about law, and when we were like at that age, we know what laws not to break and what to do, and we know a lot of things like that.
But to write it in a poem, I'm pretty sure it was not about laws to break and things like that.
Well, I say when we're young, we still write about things like that. But another question is, you said that there's not there's not pictures of William Shakespeare, but behind us there's one of Edward de Vere and William Shakespeare at this time, or what they thought looks like. So can you explain that to me?
I have my evidence where it says, I think that was it was either the that was the authorship studies or .org that said there was never a picture of him.
But when we Google pictures, there's some of both of them from their time.
And but that's just like, if I drew a picture of somebody famous and everybody accepted that, they're gonna have that picture all over.
Okay, but how do you know that Edward's is not the same way, that they were just drawn because people thought he looked like that?
Because Edward was a part of the court of Elizabeth and all that, so.
But that's it's just saying, like, we don't know what Elizabeth was like either.
There was drawings of him.
But there's drawings of Shakespeare too.
Yeah, but have you seen how many times they changed? You remember that video we watched in class where she showed us and they were saying how many different times William Shakespeare was drawn, and there was no proof of how he was drawn, and that they changed every time.
I still think there's no proof of Edward de Vere, but on to the next question. You talked about how, like, Shakespeare came from a poor family, or how you guys were talking about that. But don't you think people that come from poor families, they don't want to be poor the rest of their life, so they try to get an education, or they're smart because they have nothing to do, like they don't have no toys to play with, so they just like read books or something?
Back in the day, they didn't have time for education. He went to this place where I guess you could say he got schooling until he was so old, but then he had to drop out to help his family with ties for William Shakespeare.
And also one more, how do you graduate at 14 when you're so intelligent?
Time. With 1 minute prep before we enter our final speeches. Coulton, your rebuttal?
Hello, I'm Coleton, and I'm debating that William Shakespeare did write his plays and that no credit should go to Edward de Vere. And some might say that William Shakespeare didn't write all of his plays or didn't write any of the plays at all. These claims have evidence back in their statement, or so they say. For example, that William Shakespeare his name was written multiple ways and not written at all on most of his plays. Another point they might say is that a common man from Stanford couldn't write so much with so much intelligence about law and everything at such a young age. And another point that they might say is that, you know, his penmanship doesn't show on his papers or on his plays, but it does on a few documents that have nothing related to literature. But these points are very flawed, and yes, they are very valid, but they have many flaws in them. For example, one is William Shakespeare's name was hyphenated at sometimes, was changed at different times, but many people, even actors today, have different pen names. They change their names, they change their identities, so people know who they are, but at the same sense, they don't know exactly who they are, and that's what William Shakespeare might have done. And because another claim was that he wasn't intelligent enough to write these plays. But at the same time, William Shakespeare has very few little documented evidence of his life, his early life at a young age. So how do they know what he does and what he doesn't know? Maybe he didn't go to school, but maybe he did learn from a mentor or somebody. Nobody truly knows. So this statement is very bold to make, because if Edward de Vere can graduate law school at the age of 16, why can't William Shakespeare write a play about law at the age of 15? And the last point that some people might make is his penmanship or signature. And yes, it doesn't show up very often, but on very few things it does. Yes, some aren't related to literature, but there is one 3-page unpublished play that he wrote that has ties to the same thing that these other unrelated to literature. So if they say that this is William Shakespeare's true penmanship, then if it's on the play as well, wouldn't that also back up the statement that he did write his plays? And maybe just because all of his plays weren't written in his penmanship, maybe he wanted to be he wanted to be more professional about it, so he typed it up, or he used yeah, I'm done. Thank you for your time. Shakespeare wrote his plays.
Okay, you were saying he might have changed his name. For what reasons? Most people today, they want to get their name out there. So why would they try to hide it, or like hide their identity, kind of, is what you're saying?
Because if you, because as it was stated before, people, when they wrote poems back in that time and age, it was how they felt, and people could punish them or judge them on that. And like your point about Edward de Vere changing his name, William Shakespeare could use the same name so people would know exactly who he is, but at the same sense, not exactly who he is.
Okay, another thing is, you talked about his education. You didn't really say much about it. where would he have learned it from? Like, you said there's a few talks about him, but how can you say that he didn't have education about all this law that he put in this poem?
How can you say that he didn't? Same exact reason. You don't know. All you know is that his names are written on the play. So, he wrote them.
First affirmative closing.
Okay. My conclusion is that Edward de Vere was in fact William Shakespeare, and you should side with us. Edward de Vere should get credit for the plays that William Shakespeare wrote. Like we said, William Shakespeare's life does not match up with what he wrote. Edward de Vere's life matches up with it all, with his knowledge in law, his higher education, and his traveling. William Shakespeare does not match up, and that's why Edward de Vere was the writer of William Shakespeare. Thank you.
Okay, my closing on this case is that even though you heard what they had to say, where exactly is all their proof? Yeah, we don't show full proof on ours either, but who says that William Shakespeare isn't a real person? We know there's really a person that wrote all these poems and everything. Also, going back to what I stated earlier about the Oxfordians claim that the name William Shakespeare was a pseudonym used by Oxford, and and there's nothing to tie this name to William Shakespeare Stratford. But William Shakespeare actually has no characteristics of it. It was just a real name of a person that was closely connected with the production of the plays. Also, there's no indication that the historical record that anybody has ever suspected it of being a pseudonym or said that anybody other than Shakespeare was the author. All the historical evidence ties with William Shakespeare of Stratford to the plays bearing his name, as well as demonstrated and talked about in our case. Also, one last thing to tie this up is that people could have knowledge. They don't have to go to school to be smart. I mean, before we even go to preschool or kindergarten, we learn our ABCs. We learn how to count. It's not just about going to school to learn. There's kids that know things that aren't taught in school. There's a lot of things schools don't cover, but we still get information on from hearing about it, seeing it, other things like that. So also, I'm saying that William Shakespeare could have wrote a lot of poems about law and all this due to just seeing things and hearing things. So I hope that all of you guys vote con on the giving Edward de Vere credit, because Shakespeare's the one that really wrote it and should stay true to all of his poems and everything. So thank you. That's it.
Closing.
Oh, I gotta do closing? Okay. Edward de Vere, he, like Garron said, his whole life, he's been around, up in the court, he's been there, he's seen all of it. William Shakespeare, there's not a lot of proof. His whole life's pretty much been undocumented. William Shakespeare, as we said, there's many proofs, many websites that we got off that shows he has been around there. So, Edward de Vere didn't do his name because it was frowned upon back in the day, because he was upper class. She is right when you said she don't need knowledge or school to know knowledge, but it only makes you so much better. It makes you smarter having school and all that. So Edward de Vere did write the case, did write the plays and all that, and it would be very appreciated if you vote for us. Thank you.
So, they're arguing that Edward de Vere wrote William Shakespeare's play, but at the same time, William Shakespeare's handwriting was documented on a play. I can't remember the name of the play. I think it was like Sir Thomas's something. I can't remember the exact name of the play, but this shows his penmanship that was documented. Not only letters his will, his signature as well, saying that he is William Shakespeare, is also the same penmanship writing this play. And there's an unpublished play. So maybe all of his published plays were written in a different sense, but Edward de Vere has many documents and many, because he's been in the courts and stuff. He's been documented as being in the courts as well. But William Shakespeare could have also learned this stuff because he could have had a mentor that taught him this. But in the same sense, we don't know. All we know is that William Shakespeare's name is written on the thing. And why would you give credit to somebody else if you wrote your plays? Why wouldn't you want people to know that this is you? And then instead, that's exactly what William Shakespeare did. He wanted them to know that this was him. So William Shakespeare wrote his plays.